This is actually the second last of the knockout matches to determine a place in the candidates, which is a 12-player round robin. This is a match between mastertan and unjournakamura. So we have just jumped into game number 1, it seems. I don't see a score line, so 0-0 so far. Best of 10, 3+2. I'm going to go back to the beginning so we can have the complete 10-game series as part of the stream and the video. E4, E5, mastertan has the white pieces in the first game. Fairly typical opening so far. Normally you see knight G5, but okay, bishop G5, this is the first new move for me. I'm not going to go too slowly because it's 3+2 instead of 5+5 like I was streaming last night. So unjournakamura just ignores it and goes bishop G4. I think I need a nickname for him because his name has a lot of syllables in it. Bishop E3, knight takes, bishop at H5, mastertan defends with knight at D2. Mastertan, one of those players who's fairly comfortable in defending and just staying patient and waiting for the right time to counterattack. And a lot of Aussies do play that way, but certainly quite a sharp player when he needs to be. E takes F5, rook takes F5, H3, bishop takes, G takes, and pawn at E6. So not quite up to the live position yet. Mastertan prefers to counterattack with pawn at G4 rather than move the knight backwards or exchange for the bishop on E7. E takes D5, bishop at E6 check, king H8, and bishop takes F5. We're still not up to it, so I'm going to skip ahead. Bishop F7, C3, knight at H4. No direct threats yet. Bishop takes H7, that's very unusual. Trying to understand what the idea is. If king takes, what's the follow-up? Does he just want to defend with pawn at G2? I'm not looking at the moves. Pawn at G3, okay. Knight comes backwards. So white, very solid with all the pawns, but is a little bit of material down. D4, and that's it. So black to play in game number 1. Let's see if we can work out a plan for black. 6 syllables, that's really too long to say when I repeat his name very often. UJN. Un jour means one day, right, in French? So rook E1, E4, last move's played. It seems like F3 is the main target at the moment, but mastertan doesn't really need to put the rook on in defense, so rook at H5 check. Perhaps waiting for a bishop in hand to put on H7. So F takes, D takes. I guess now he needs to consider something landing on F3 very soon. Is he going to defend with pawn at G2? And then you can chase the queen away to C1. I'm not really sure whether that does anything. Win the exchange with knight at E2 check, rook takes, bishop takes. So pawn at G2. Is it necessary though? Mastertan says no. He'd rather just get rid of the pawn entirely, trying to push the bishop away. So the material imbalance is something like a rook and a couple of pawns for 3 minor pieces. And black has a big material advantage, but with 15 seconds left, it's going to be a mad scramble because neither side is really anywhere near the opponent's king after 25 moves. Bishop seems to have nowhere to go, so bishop takes, queen takes F3, knight at F6. I guess just leave the rook there. No, sack the queen. Wow. Is he going to defend with bishop at G2? I think it's necessary. No, he attacks. Well, I don't really see where it's going. He has to watch out for knight at F3 check. That's why I was suggesting to defend. Still no immediate danger. So I was expecting bishop takes G6, just ignoring the threat here. Maybe there was a way to push the king to F7 in the end. Or was king E7 safe? So semi-threat on E4. I'm not even sure whether it mates. Probably. Pawn at E4 seems to be the threat, so check. Bishop takes. So if rook takes, white can defend, it seems. What else can black do though? There's going to be a discovered check otherwise. I mean, you might as well just take the bishop. Rook takes, put a blocker on. Let's see how mastertan's going to defend this with a bishop landing on h1 perhaps. Still black needs a little bit more to mate. I think, well, both sides attacking now with this big threat a takes b7. The best thing black could do is try to find a way to pick off that pawn with the bishop, but it's not that obvious how you can check and then take the pawn on a6. The knight's got d3 covered even. So rook b8 in defense, a takes, rook takes, just pawn at a6. But now move the rook somewhere, then the king can land on b8 in defense. So white this time needs more material. This is really scary with the queen on d1, but you can still block on e2, rook covers. Still no mate threats for either side that I can see. Pawn at f3. Now can you... Oh, there's probably a threat with pawn at b7. So black is keeping up the checks. Queen at h2. Still, I don't see... I think white's got this game. Mastertan's got this game. With only rooks at hand, but... Yeah, time running out. Big threat of pawn at d7 or pawn at b7. Should be enough to win. Yeah, queen's misplaced on h2. Just block on f2. Yeah, that's it. Black is out of checks. So, really long time scramble. It started on about move 25, went for almost 30 moves. No, it's still going. But I think Unjournakamura will resign very soon. So mastertan with the white pieces takes the first game out of 10. e4, e6. Let's see what mastertan has prepared. Is it going to be the same thing he played against me with a kind of lone wolf opening with bishop d7? Very unique, very unusual. So one idea is to play knight b4 and bishop c6 and try and activate this light square bishop, which otherwise relies on the move e6 to e5, which obviously can't be played now. Otherwise it's hard to activate the bishop. So this is why mastertan's trying to do it as early as possible. Probably just knight b4 and trading, but then what happens after bishop e4? Then d5. And the bishop has nowhere to go. No, he's delaying knight b4. Probably his intention is to sack on e5, but it is a whole piece sack for just a pawn. Not sure whether clear cast is here, but he did something very similar in the match against John Lee last night. Sacked a knight for a pawn on e5 for some activity. So anything stopping Unjour from just going knight takes e5, then it's only one pawn for the piece. Prefers to throw in this move knight at h5 because we have the rook g8, bishop takes h7, which is very good for white if it's not already a good position for white a piece ahead. I'm guessing bishop back to f8, although it's terribly passive, and then you could just pick off the pawn on e5. And then the pawn is destined for h6 in the end. Yeah, so bishop f8, I'm expecting knight takes e5. Somebody followed, but I can't tell who it is now. Maybe I'll have a look. See if I can log into Streamlabs and see who it is. Alright, so we've got the players slowing down a little bit after the first 10 moves of the opening. I'm just on another window, so I can't quite see at the moment. It'll take me a minute to log in. Alright, so what's just happened? Knight takes, queen takes, pawn at f6, queen back to e2, knight at d4, queen e4. Now's a good time for bishop c6. Alright, so I've caught up to the action. White to play is blocked with two threats. But I assume mastertan's idea is queen takes d4 and bishop takes g2, offering the queen trade. But if the rook comes to d8, the black king is seemingly much safer than the white king. Then there's ideas like rook g1, pawn at h2, Rook takes queen, bishop at f1. Yeah, I mean, typical safety ideas in Bughouse as well. Let the opponent promote and then stick a bishop on f1 to block everything. But unjournakamura may not allow this. What's the option? Knight takes d5, queen takes. Queen takes, pawn takes, queen at a4 check or queen at e3 check. Queen at a4 check, the knight can just come back to c6. Okay, queen g4. So white only seems to have one threat at the moment with knight takes g7. Is that easy enough to cover with pawn at g6? Does mastertan want to look for something better than pawn at g6? And if so, what's the option? He's probably seeing if a knight for f3 will be useful, but it's not that clear that it leads to a fast attack. I mean, it's a check. He's got a couple of checks, but so he's sacked a bishop on g2. So the idea is that he's got enough pawns to really disturb this rook on h1. If queen takes, pawn at f3, queen moves, pawn at g2, rook g1. The queen would then be tied down to the square h2. I don't think knight takes g7 in this case is a good idea. Although, I mean, there is a threat to take the rook with check. It's very scary for both sides. If knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, pawn at g2 is the sharpest move. Queen takes, rook check. King... Yeah, I don't know. Maybe mastertan has another idea. After knight takes g7 check. Does he really have to take this? Can he play king d7 or king e7 here to save the rook? I don't think he really wants to play rook f8. Knight takes c2 check. I was just having a look at this to see what's the plan. Does he want to go knight at g2 check to follow? So assuming bishop takes c2, knight at g2 check. And what happens on king f1 firstly? So 3 pawns in hand only. There's no queen checks. There's pawn at e2. To avoid the promotion, the knight would have to sack. F takes e2. King takes g2. And then, okay, that's a different story. King d2 is played in the game. So any knight check, we're just going to see king takes c2, presumably. I'm sure mastertan is looking at queen takes d3 check to see if he has enough for an attack, but no, pawn at e3 check. I have to try to understand this move. It's not obvious at first. Does he want to take the e3 square and then sack the queen and then go knight back to... Oh, castle's check. That's a nice one. I didn't see that at first. So the king is certainly looking safer than it was before. I mean, there is a queen at a8 check to follow, assuming black is going to run out of checks. It just doesn't feel like he has enough to mate at the moment. So you can see this move possibly helping to defend the squares c6 and a6. But is it worth saving the knight, just dropping something to save the knight? No, he's gone for it. So bishop at d3. mastertan very good at finding force mates in this sort of position, I have to say. So pawn at b5 you would expect. There's no blockers if queen takes a8 is played at the moment. So mastertan is really committed to the attack. Rook takes d5 check to follow. Yeah, you just got to stop the king running back to take the knight on c2. So I guess some blocker on c5, like pawn at c5, no? Unjournakamura thinks he can just run back and take the knight on. He might be right. Yeah, ooh, this is scary stuff. What about b3? It's his only way, but king takes. think mastertan just doesn't have enough. Yeah, and then queen at a8 should win. Or pawn at b7, I think, also good enough. Yeah, so there's also a queen takes f7 check after queen at b7. And knight at... okay, queen at f4. So well played. A nice king walk there from unjournakamura. The score is now 1-1. Let's go back and see if I can finally log into Streamlabs. So we have the old Rai Lopez and Crazyhouse game number 3. mastertan playing the white pieces again. I think this is the same line where I played black against him in a few games in our 10-game match. So for those new to Crazyhouse, they're part of the Crazyhouse World Championship, which is a double knockout. So I did defeat mastertan in the winners bracket, but he's still in the competition. And this is a knockout match, so the loser will be out, the winner makes it into the candidates. So this is very different. mastertan did not play the move c3 at all in our series. He just played standard moves, knight c3, d3, bishop g5, castles kingside. But yeah, this is more like a chess game, it feels, with c3, b5, bishop c2, d5, take, pawn at g5 is, I think, the first drop in the game, and knight g4, d4. Right, so black to play. Does he want to take here and open up the e-file? I think it's not too dangerous. It's very easy to block with the pawn on e6, for example. So I think nothing wrong with taking on d4. It's what I would expect. And if rook e1, you can also put a pawn straight on e3. Even options to sack the queen with d takes and then e takes f2 check. So instead, c takes, bishop takes, and knight c3. So this time not so good to sack the queen because it will just be taken for free. And so I assume black is just going to retreat. Yeah, I can't see anything better than just queen d8, but there is a pawn at d5 move which interferes with the defense here, which could be very painful. I guess in that case bishop takes f2 to save some material. It could perhaps be an option to take on c3 and then d takes c6, and the queens are staring at each other. And then if rook takes, there could be some knight at e2 check, so perhaps bishop takes instead. Any choices for black? Queen c4, queen c5. Adds a little bit of pressure to bishop to f2, but the response would be knight to e4 after queen c5. Could always pick off the bishop first and then bishop at e3, for example. But I'm expecting knight e4 from mastertan. No, queen e2 check instead. Just overprotecting f2. I mean, I'm sure knight e4 would be a good move. Maybe not now that there's e takes f2 check. So probably just f takes e3, and then we'll see which way Unjour wants to take back on e3. Seven. Really hard to log into Streamlabs. Alright, so what's happened while I've been away for a few seconds? Still logging in. Bishop takes e3, knight takes e3, knight takes d4. So it seems this was a good way to do it for mastertan, because he's ended up with a queen takes e3 check. And then surely he's got to attack the queen somehow. That's why I was expecting knight e4, but this time maybe not so good because the bishop is hanging here on c2. You could play knight at e4, but then... yeah, probably knight at e4. No, he's gone bishop at e4. So, it seems like he's just making sure all the squares around the king are covered, especially this diagonal here, h1 to a8, very important to control once you've castled. So pawn at f4, attempting the queen to take, then there's a knight at e2 check. So when the queens are hovering around the center of the board, it is often very useful to just drop pieces on to attack the queen and gain tempo as you're dropping the pieces back on the board. Not sure where the queen is going to go, so mastertan's decided to sack it. Is the plan just to take on a8, and then I'm still not sure what he's threatening. No, rook ad1 first. So bishops defending each other. I think unjournakamura is going to do some sort of a counter sack. I'm just not sure how yet. Knight at g3, something crazy like this. H takes, F takes is the idea, and threaten mate on h2. Whoa, left himself dangerously short of time. Pawn at h3. There's no real threat. The bishop covers g2. So you might even get away with bishop takes rook, and then bishop takes back on g2. Yeah, you could throw in rook at b8 check first, or rook at c8 even. So king, yeah, surely got to be mate with pawn at f6 check. Just keep putting pieces on to check. Okay, so it's all gone with the white pieces so far. 3 wins in a row. And we see another French. Ah, it's a real French this time. With knight c3. So winner we're French in Crazyhouse. Not what I would recommend with black, but let's see if mastertan's got an original idea. He's full of them this tournament so far. Let's see whether he wants to go knight g6 or knight f5. Knight g6. Okay, so one idea is to sack the knight either on e4 or d5. D4 or e5. So knight takes e5 is the idea. Get 2 pawns for the piece. If white has open diagonals for the bishops, however, even though 2 pawns are usually worth a piece, it can tend to backfire if the pieces come back quickly to put pressure on the black king side. So a3, bishop a5, rook b1. A very unusual move, rook b1. So it seems to indicate he wants to play b4 without having to worry too much about a sack on b4. If I was mastertan, probably just go bishop b6 and then try and pressure d4. Another move is perhaps to throw in the queen h4 or even knight h4, now that the white knight has not gone to the square f3. So you get this typical French bad bishop on c8, which is going to take quite a long time to find its purpose. Because just like in chess, you do have to play bishop d7 before you grab the pawn on d4, otherwise you run into some bishop b5 check. Bishop e3 is the way to defend. And then I'm sure mastertan is looking for the right time to sack a knight on e5. He might just play bishop d7 here, or what else? I'm not sure whether he wants to be in too much of a hurry to castle kingside. Yeah, so sack a knight on e5. And can either take the pawn back or even push d5 to d4. Even pawn at d4 looks okay. But the response may be knight at f3, chasing the queen away, but then queen g4 after that seems to put pressure on g2 and keep the fork enabled. So instead, pawn at h3. Now you notice here that mastertan has still kept the option to take the knight with check, so it means that this is potentially a deadly threat, knight at f3 check. Especially if he can get a pawn for g2 first. But with the knight taking back on c3, the queen is covering f3, and I'm not sure how deadly knight at g2 check is after king d2. Maybe not so bad for white. So instead we saw knight at f3, queen g4. And yeah, not quite sure what to expect here from unjournakamura. Rook g1, but then you have to do something to protect the knight on f3 anyway. Knight g3 is away after h takes. Perhaps knight f4 is better, because then you're threatening just to pick the pawn off with rook takes g2. Yeah, so I wonder what mastertan is thinking about here. He often goes into these long thinks where he's looking for an original sequence of captures and usually sacrifices. He does like to sacrifice his queen when least expected. So this a3 move, you'll see that it also prevents a black from playing pawn at a3. Okay, pawn at e4. And white having a big advantage on the clock. Are we going to see a queen sack? Queen takes, knight takes, e takes, f3 is what I would expect at first. Just knowing mastertan. There we go. And now rook at g1 check. Probably bishop back to f1. And then... So for this counter sack to work, probably white needs a knight in hand for g5. And even then, I'm not sure that it leads to mate. And that means that, let's say bishop f1, black can play some sort of attacking move. Perhaps knight at e4. But is b4 or pawn at b4 a good response? And what happens on d4? Bishop f1, then d4. So queen at f1 is certainly safer for the white king. Does give back a little bit of material. Knight takes e5. Ah, yeah, I totally missed this one. Knight takes e5. Interesting that mastertan didn't take the queen with check first. But he can always do that next move. What is the material imbalance at the moment? Let's say rook takes queen is coming next. Seems that mastertan is up a pawn. I was half expecting him to take the bishop on d3 first, but no. Maybe he wants to keep the knight and go knight at f3 check. Take here first. So you'll see the piece that's defending is the knight for e1 in case king d1 is played. Not so easy to deflect the knight from g2. And the other avenue is via either knight at b2 or... Oh, hang on. This smells very matey. Threatened knight takes c3 check. So mastertan didn't think knight at b2 got anywhere after king e2. Ooh, knight covers f7. Check here, easy to block with the bishop. But still the main threat is knight takes c3, mate in 1. That's a square that unjournakamura has to defend. Okay, so bishop at c4, an attempt. Oh, what? Sacrificing the queen, I don't quite understand. Just go knight takes cover all the knight drops. It should be a win for mastertan. He's covering the square d2 in case knight takes e3 check. But the light squares are weak. Good spotting. It could have taken on g2 as well. Knight e5 is key to keep the checks up. 2 queens in hand should be easy. Although I haven't seen it yet. Is it just queen h1 and... yeah, queen h takes g2 is mate in 1. There we go. So nice play. 3-1 to mastertan. With a very timely queen sacrifice on g2. And then a very effective play using the knights and the pawn at b2 and the knight at e4 threat, which was not covered in time. This knight takes c3. And there might have been a tricky secondary threat that I was missing as well. Something like knight takes f2. I'm not sure where all the pieces were now, deflecting the bishop away from d2 perhaps. So, a highly original opening. What is this? Knight f3, d5, knight e5, f6, knight f3, e5. It's almost like mastertan has the black pieces, because it seems that black is a tempo ahead. He's playing a same-ish sort of a structure with f6, e5. Well, not quite a King's Indian in reverse without g3. But yeah, never seen anything like this before. Pawn at d5, knight g3. And both players don't mind playing totally original openings and just winging it. At present, unjournakamura has more activity than mastertan. So mastertan mainly only playing Crazyhouse in the championship matches, which are roughly every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or so. But unjournakamura much more active on the Lichess website. And they're just talking in the game chat about the head-to-head score, which I didn't even notice at first, but mastertan does have a big lead, 52 versus 15. So although their ratings are similar, it's definitely worthy to note that, yeah, the head score may be indicative of the result, but let's see, anything can happen. First player to 6 wins, or even 5.5 in a 10-game match. So d4, e4, knight back to g1 have been the last moves in the game. Now mastertan is the one with a 1-minute lead. You'd probably expect knight 1, e2 and knight f4 to follow. So an incredibly unusual and original game from mastertan. He's made almost all knight moves so far in the first 9 moves of the game. And looks like there has only been 1 trade of pawns. mastertan keeping the pawn off the board. But yeah, no obvious drops at the moment. I'd probably throw in bishop b4 check if I was playing black here. Just to make mastertan decide what to do with either the bishop or putting a pawn back on c3. Knight c6 certainly can't hurt. I guess black is, yeah, considering what happens. Oh, was he offline? I didn't notice because mastertan's just given him an extra minute. So yeah, didn't notice unjournakamura offline there, but good sportsmanship from mastertan if he noticed he was disconnected for a minute. So knight 1 e2, bishop b4. Does he now play knight c3? No, he wants to trade the bishops. So notice here that the knight on e2 at the moment is the only piece defending d4. But with this bishop trade, Well, you don't really count the queen because of the threat of knight c2 check. But not really sure whether you want to waste a bishop just to pressure d4. It's easier to defend with pawn at c3 or e3. So I'm also not sure whether I would allow the knight to trade on e6. Probably better to drop a bishop and defend. So that is what has happened. Perhaps bishop at c5? No. Pawn at e5. So I guess he wants to come into g7 with the bishop. Seems to win a pawn. Because most of the white pieces are pointing towards the black king side, you might even see castling queen side at some moment. But firstly, blocking up the position with f5. I mean, I'd probably like to go knight gh5, but I just feel like white should be castling sometime soon and not leaving the bishop on f1 for too much longer. So Opperweisen's asking in the game chat, mastertan's been inactive for a while. Yeah, like I said, he's only playing the Crazyhouse Championship matches. So how would I rate his current strength? I actually found this match very hard to predict in advance, even after looking at the head-to-head score, which I didn't notice before. I was actually slightly favouring unjournakamura, maybe 7-5 in a tiebreak. That's before the match started. Now I wouldn't say that, but mastertan, as we know, certainly one of the most experienced players on the Lichess website. Been playing Crazyhouse for, yeah, I didn't even know how many years. I mean, I've been on Lichess for about 3.5 years. mastertan, I think at least 5 years, maybe more. But I don't know. I mean, the scoreline in my match against him was 6-3, but I could have easily lost game 9. The score would have been 4-5 with mastertan having the white pieces if he won that. 5-all going into tiebreaks. Yeah, I could have easily lost the match in a tiebreak, so I wouldn't necessarily say he's lost strength. I think when you've been inactive for a while, you do tend to miss moves which would normally be obvious to you. And it's not that you don't know the ideas, but it just doesn't come as fast as it used to when you're active all the time. I think there's nothing wrong with mastertan's understanding of the game. It's just perhaps he isn't quite as fresh as he used to be a couple of years ago. So b6, knight takes a6. The knights are in position here, but black is doing a very good job defending the king side at the moment. Here we go, using that extra pawn and saying these two pieces in hand aren't really doing much at the moment. No obvious drops for black. So does he want to take check with the knight, or does he want to take with the pawn? And still don't really think pawn at g7 goes anywhere at the moment. It leaves this knight without a square. Perhaps just leave this square vacant for the moment. So I think good idea to sack the piece back, but he's probably going to have to come back anyway. Bishop f8. No, I don't understand this move. Oh, bishop takes h5. G takes, probably now rook g8. So leave this pin with the bishop on h6. And trade for the knight. No, knight at c4. Alright, it seems the bishops are doing a good job, so mastertan has to hack away at those bishops in order to have any chance. So knight f6 the third, but he has to take this first. He could even castle and then go knight f6 check. But then there's probably too many knights for white to survive. Alright, is there a mate for black? I say yes, but you have to be precise. I'm not sure about this. This is more an attempt to defend with bishop takes f6. It's not really a full-on attempt to mate this bishop at h4 move. I was thinking knight back to f3, although I'm not even entirely convinced about that. So bishop b5 check, bishop takes h6, very helpful to defend backwards the square e2, and also the knight at c4 check. So knight at b4 is possible to hold the bishop. Master 10. Also, one thing I have to say, he's got a very good defensive instinct. Especially in the time scrambles, he knows the key squares to defend. The king is now very safe on d2, there's no knight for c4. Even if there is, the king is safe on c3. I think Master 10's got this one. So yeah, running out of checks. It's just queen at e6, queen at h6, knight at f7. So very well played, Master 10. I think Master 10 has already stepped it up a notch or two from the match that I played against him a couple of weeks ago. So I think there's a notable difference in how sharp he is, especially in the time scrambles. So scoreline is currently 4-1 in favour of Master 10. Yeah, by upper, he just says he's definitely got the talent to be higher. I think he simply do other things and rarely plays ZH. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. He's certainly got the talent and the understanding. So we have another slightly unusual move order in the opening. Normally you see d takes e5, but it's a closed center. So d5, knight d4, a3. Where was the bishop then? Oh, it wasn't developed yet, so just stopping bishop b4, bishop c5 instead. Bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, and d6, white to play. It's really a must-win game for unjournakamura to come back. And then he has to break Master 10 with the black pieces. Bishop e2 first, before knight f3. Alright, now it's getting crazy. g5. This bishop e2 does help to stop knight h5, which is what you'd normally like to do, and put the knight in on f4. Possibly cover this square first with rook g8, or even rook h7 helps to cover all the squares. I like this funny prophylactic moves, rook h7. Alright, so Master 10 just playing slowly with bishop d7. And we might see some prophylactic move like a6. No, so he's traded for the bishop, gone bishop at g4. So you notice here the check on g7 does nothing. The knight's just going to be stranded on g7. And it remains to be seen whether this g5 can be proven to be any sort of a weakness. Doesn't look like it at the moment, but if there are high trades, it could easily backfire on Master 10, so he really has to do a good job controlling the trade flow. Just like in Bughouse, you would tell your partner, you know, don't lose a pawn for g7 and a rook for h8. It's a lot easier to do in a closed position in Crazyhouse. Yeah, so I was expecting h4. This is the best way for white to open up the h file and trade a pair of pawns, rooks, whatever he can. So I would assume the idea here is, well, possibly knight at d4, but there's also the idea to close the position with g4 if queen takes. But no, g takes f3. Alright, I'm expecting knight at d4, but then what happens on queen d1 or even queen d3? Perhaps g4 take bishop takes? No, Master 10 has gone a completely different route and allowed bishop takes h4. So king takes bishop takes f6 is certainly not going to be allowed. That's why Master 10 trades the knight for the bishop on h4. Now he can take because he's not got the knight covering the square h5. So perhaps white should be looking for a way to block out the bishop so he can eventually play knight at f5. This is one of the key ideas. Knight at f5. But if he goes pawn at e6, then what happens? F takes, d takes, bishop takes. Still not that easy to knock away the bishop from this diagonal. Any other ideas? The knight on c3 is not doing much at the moment. Certainly not in attack. And knight at d4 is coming with ideas of pawn at b3. Bishop at g5 also looks good, gaining time on the rook. Wow, okay, so this is a way to tempt mastertan into trading the bishop. And also the idea was to trade on f6 and then to stick the knight on h5. So not a bad move at all. Knight at g4 from unjournakamura. In desperation, 1-4 down in a must-win game. A minute down on the clock. So rook takes, not accepting the sacrifice because there will be g takes and a knight drop somewhere to follow. Yeah, so pawn at g6 instead, bishop at h4, bishop at g5, white to play. So this pawn really does a great job in stopping the knight drops, assuming that white will eventually pick up the knight on f6, although mastertan's also doing a very good job in preventing this knight from being traded. Bishop at f4, I'd really like to gain time hitting the rook if I was mastertan. No obvious way to target this knight on f6 at the moment. The rook has to come back first before pawn or bishop at g5. And bishop at f4 helps to cover that square anyway. Yeah, he could play rook h1. Probably doesn't hurt to play rook h1 check. Yeah, but he's gone bishop at f4. I like it. Yeah, so rook g1. Yeah, rook h1 might have been better just to prevent rook g1. But he could be liable to some more attacks on the rook. Knight at h3. Has to make a move. Knight at d4. No, check here first. That rook is going to be deadly in combination with the other pieces. Either just the direct rook at d2 check, or knight at e3, or pawn at d2. All look good. So this is yeah, that's it. Too strong, mastertan. Still hasn't taken the match yet. The scoreline is 5-1. So mastertan in the driver's seat, just cruising at the moment. One more game will seal the match. So we have this very sharp line in the Scotch with queen h4. Black does not take on e4 with check, because white can trade queens, and then white will be the first one to put it back on the board with some threat, you would imagine. So knight c3 defending, probably bishop b4, just renewing the threat. No, bishop c5 instead. I suppose, well, there's two main options, pawn at d4 or knight at d3. Probably nothing wrong with playing pawn at g3 either. Yeah, I think the safest option would be knight at d3, just attacking and defending at the same time. So we've got 18 spectators in the game chat. Legion Destroyer saying this mastertan guy is OP. Yeah, he can certainly step up his level when he needs to, I think, mastertan. So how many games of Crazyhouse on Lichess has he played? 25,000, over 25,000, there we go. I think I've only played about 9,000. Well, rated games, plus lots of games unrated against the computer. So why is mastertan taking so long? There were three options. He's going with pawn at g3 and then knight at d3. Oh, don't tell me he was worried about the bishop sack and the queen sack on f2. I don't think there was much to worry about. Okay, so bishop d4. What would I do here? Material is even. Is there anything better than just defending with something to d2? I'm sure mastertan wants to be, yeah, I was just about to say, he wants to be aggressive and play a move like e5. There's somebody in the Twitch chat. A very cute triangle, says Sydney. Yes, that is the craziest opera house that I've ever seen. There's a light show in winter in most years called the Vivid Festival in Sydney. That's where the image comes from. Blunderman says, I have 36,000, but didn't help much in my case. Yeah, well, the main thing is to learn something from every game. If you don't learn something from every game, then you make the same mistakes. Although if you find 36,000 different mistakes to make, I think you're doing very well. I guess there are almost infinite mistakes you can make in Crazyhouse. And we've all made thousands of them, doesn't matter who you are. Even Stockfish has made countless mistakes. Because it's such a tactical game, and when Stockfish runs out of its depth, if you see one more move further ahead, then usually it flip-flops its evaluation every time it looks one more move ahead in a tactical sequence. So unjournakamura did not take. Bishop takes e5. Interesting. So the response was going to be queen e2, was it? Or just taking? Queen e2, I wasn't sure what happens on knight at d4. Queen takes, knight takes, then knight takes c2. And I think black king is safe, safer than the white king. But possibly just trading the bishop first and then queen e2 and trading queens. White king is very safe in those lines, even a pawn down. Nearby Blacktown. Yeah, I've been to Blacktown. It's been a long time though. Many years ago. It was pretty rough last time I went there, but that was a long time ago. Pawn at a3. Try to undermine the knight on c3. Do you just go bishop d2 and then a takes rook b1? And surely you can find something better than this. Yeah, but I like this move from unjournakamura. He's played some good moves in this series. He just hasn't held it in the critical moments and in the time scrambles. Mastertan has had the better of him. There are not many white pieces that are very active here. I mean, look at the bishop on f1, look at the rooks. Knight d1 attempting to hold all the material. Did you ever play professionally with a FIDE rating? Not chess. I mean, can't really play professionally in Australia. I mean, who has? Was Ian Rogers the only one to do it from Australia? I know some of the young grandmasters and IMs have gone to Europe to play, but you wouldn't really call them professional players. They have to study and work and so on to make a living. So no, never done anything like that in chess, in terms of chess, but I mean, I coach, that's what I do to make a living. Because I can't play well enough, that's why I coach. Alright, so f3, queen goes back. Yeah, I mean, unjournakamura is still alive. The match is not over yet. He got a big time advantage. If he can just hold on to this queen, I think black is doing much better on the board in this game. So my best result in a single game was I had a draw against Anton Smirnov, who's the Australian #1 when he was a GM. About 25-30 FIDE. But I haven't made much more than about 2200 FIDE. Mastertan down to 2 seconds, rook b1. So here we go, finally a pawn for d2, but where's the king running to? f2 and g1. And it was a total swindle draw, I have to say, against Anton. Might have even made David Smurden's swindling book. I think he included one or two of my games, but I haven't seen it yet. Knight at d4, queen d3. Bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. Big threat to play knight at... Actually, there's no threat. What is black doing now? Black is the one short on time. This might be the end of the match very soon. Sack the queen. Bishop takes, threatening pawn at f2 mate. Probably go this way. Pawn at h2. Still no obvious way in. I don't know. Drop the rook with check, but hang on, there's f8. Whoa. Yeah, block out the bishop, I think is necessary. But now Master 10's winning on material. I think this is over, folks. Cleaning up all the pawns. Still no big threat. Just take on d2. And that is the ball game. Dubby, thank you for the follow. A Nigerian player, Dubby. Yeah, that rook is a goner. The knight's gone. Yeah, like I said, winning on material. Knight at e7 to follow. I think that's it. Okay, 6-1. The official scoreline is 6-1. They may decide to stop the match here. We'll just keep following for a moment and see if they play any more. But that could very well be it. Now there is another match coming up soon. It's not a Crazyhouse World Championship match, and I don't know how to change the graphic in a hurry, but it's a Crazyhouse Team League match between Legion Destroyer and his opponent, who I'll remember in a moment. I guess we'll find out when I follow Legion. But congratulations to Master 10, 6-1 result over unjournakamura. He has qualified for the candidates, which means I will be playing him again in the next couple of months. So the candidates will probably start in a couple of weeks when the other two remaining matches are over. So those are Bugzilla versus Clearcast at 10 PM Monday Sydney time, which is midday UTC on Monday. And I have a match, even though myself and my opponent King Switcher have already qualified. We will be playing just for fun and for a bonus $25.